The ship glided smoothly through the void, its sleek metal body reflecting the dim light of distant stars. Captain Alara stood at the helm, eyes fixed on the infinite expanse ahead. The hum of the engines was the only sound breaking the silence of the bridge. "We're almost there," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the mission that loomed over her. Beside her, Lieutenant Kale adjusted the coordinates on the console. "The system's ahead," Kale confirmed, his voice low and focused. Alara's gaze flickered briefly to the distant planet on the screen, a swirling mass of colors and mystery. "Prepare for entry into the atmosphere," Alara commanded. The crew moved with practiced precision, each member knowing their task. Tension was in the air, though none spoke of it. The stars beyond their ship flickered like distant fireflies, their quiet light now beckoning them toward the unknown. With a deep breath, Alara set her jaw. "Let's see what's waiting for us." The ship entered the planet's lower atmosphere, the hull shuddering briefly as it passed through the first layers of cloud cover. Alara held her breath, feeling the tension in the air as they neared the surface. "Steady," she whispered, though no one could hear her over the roar of the atmospheric entry. The ship dipped slightly, adjusting its trajectory. "We're almost through," Kale said, glancing at the screens. The storm ahead was growing stronger, the turbulent clouds churning with an ominous energy. Alara's fingers tightened around the controls, and she glanced at the crew. They were silent, each of them acutely aware of the risks they were facing. With a final thrust, the ship burst through the last layer of clouds, and the surface of the planet came into full view. They had arrived. The ship shuddered as it passed through the storm's outer layers, rain battering the hull like 1,000 tiny hands. The howling wind outside seemed to echo within the ship, though the interior remained steady. Alara focused on the controls, her eyes narrowing with determination. "Brace for turbulence," she ordered. Kale quickly engaged the stabilizers, and the ship's movements steadied, though the turbulent storm raged outside. "We've entered the zone," Kale said, his voice calm despite the chaos. The planet's surface was now visible in all its rugged glory, massive mountain ranges, vast oceans, and a network of dense forests. Alara felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Their mission was about to begin, and she knew the dangers were only just starting to unfold. "Prepare the landing gear," she commanded. "We're going down." With a sudden jolt, the ship's landing gear deployed, locking into place as it descended further into the thick atmosphere. The storm raged, but Alara's focus was unwavering. The crew remained silent, watching as the dense forest below became more visible with each passing second. "Touchdown in 2 minutes," Kale called out, his voice steady despite the battering turbulence. Alara's hands gripped the controls, her knuckles white. "Get ready for a rough landing," she said. The ship's descent became more erratic, the atmosphere's violent pull increasing as they neared the ground. Alara's heart raced, but she remained calm. The storm outside intensified, and the once visible planet's surface was now nearly obscured. "Steady," she murmured, guiding the ship through the worst of the turbulence. The crew braced themselves for impact. The ship's landing gear hit the ground with a violent thud, sending a shockwave through the vessel. Alara's hands flew over the controls, forcing the ship to settle, the engines roaring as they strained against the atmospheric forces. The storm outside intensified even more, but the ship had made it. The hull groaned with the pressure, but the crew was safe. The land beneath them was rugged, with large boulders and towering trees surrounding them. Alara exhaled a deep breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "We've landed," she said, her voice steady but with an undertone of relief. Kale turned to her, nodding. "Now the real work begins." As the crew began to unbuckle their harnesses and prepared to disembark, Alara took one last look at the storm outside, knowing the planet had more to reveal. The crew would be tested, but they were ready. The crew disembarked from the ship, the heavy rain still pouring down in relentless sheets. The planet's atmosphere was thick with moisture, the air heavy and humid, and the storm clouds overhead showed no signs of clearing. Captain Alara stepped out first, feeling the damp soil beneath her boots. The forest surrounding them was dense, the trees towering high above, their thick branches swaying in the gale-force winds. "We need to find shelter," Alara said, her voice cutting through the howling wind. Kale nodded in agreement, scanning the surroundings. "There's a cave system not far from here, Captain," he said, pointing toward a jagged mountain ridge in the distance. "It's our best bet for shelter from this storm." Alara turned to the crew. "Gear up, we move out in 5 minutes." She was determined. The planet's secrets were calling, but they had to survive the elements first. The crew trekked through the thick forest, the rain pelting them as they pushed forward. The mud beneath their boots sucked at their feet, making each step a struggle. Alara led the way, Kale by her side, keeping his eyes on the distant mountain ridge. Whoa! The trees around them were ancient, their trunks gnarled and twisted, as if they had stood for centuries. Every now and then, a low rumble of thunder shook the ground beneath their feet, and the wind howled louder, pushing them off course. "Stay close," Alara ordered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "We can't afford to get separated." The team moved cautiously, navigating the dense foliage. As they approached the base of the ridge, a sense of foreboding settled over them. Something about this planet felt alive, watching, waiting. As they neared the ridge, the storm seemed to intensify, the wind howling as though trying to push them back. The mountainside was steep, the rocks slick with rainwater, making the climb difficult. Alara was the first to start ascending, her eyes focused on the narrow path leading up the slope. The rest of the crew followed, their hands gripping the wet rocks as they navigated the treacherous terrain. The wind picked up even more, pulling at their jackets and hoods. "Almost there," Kale called out, his voice strained but determined. Alara didn't respond, her attention fixed on the rocky path ahead. The deeper they climbed, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The clouds above seemed to twist and churn, as if the very sky itself was alive, and the crew began to feel an uneasy sensation in the pit of their stomachs. Something was wrong. As they neared the cave entrance, a sudden gust of wind whipped across the ridge, nearly knocking them off balance. The cave was hidden behind a waterfall, its entrance barely visible through the curtain of water that cascaded down the mountain. Alara's heart raced as she approached, knowing that they needed to take shelter immediately. "Get inside," she ordered, her voice cutting through the storm. The crew scrambled, ducking beneath the waterfall and into the shadowed cave. The sound of the storm outside muffled as they made their way deeper into the cave's mouth. Inside, the temperature dropped, the cool air a welcome relief from the heat of the storm. Alara turned to the group, her face grim. "We're safe for now," she said, but the uneasy feeling in the pit of her stomach remained. Something was waiting for them out there, and they weren't alone. Inside the cave, the crew huddled together, catching their breath after the grueling trek through the storm. Alara was the first to speak. "We'll stay here for the night. Tomorrow, we begin our search for the source of the energy signal." The crew nodded, but there was no excitement in their faces, only exhaustion and caution. The atmosphere in the cave was heavy, the silence broken only by the occasional drip of water from the cave ceiling. Kale checked the datapad again. "There's something odd about this planet," he said quietly, his brow furrowed. "The energy readings are coming from deeper in the mountains. We're getting closer." Alara stared into the darkness of the cave entrance, a sense of unease settling over her. "Tomorrow," she said, though she didn't feel as confident as she sounded. "We move out at first light." The storm raged on outside, but inside, they were safe, at least for now. The next morning, the crew gathered around the entrance of the cave, preparing for the day ahead. The storm had lessened overnight, but the atmosphere still felt thick, as though the planet was holding its breath. "We move out now," Captain Alara said, her voice firm and commanding. "Kale, track the energy signal and lead the way. Stay sharp." Kale nodded, his face grim as he checked the portable scanner. "It's coming from deeper in the mountains, Captain. We'll have to cross some difficult terrain." The crew geared up, securing their packs and weapons, each of them knowing the dangers they faced. The mountains loomed ahead, their jagged peaks obscured by the morning mist. "Let's go," Alara ordered, stepping out into the cool, misty air. The team moved forward, each step taking them further into the unknown. As the crew ascended the mountain, the terrain became more treacherous. The rocks were slick with morning dew, and the air grew thinner as they climbed higher. Kale led the way, his eyes scanning the rocky path ahead. "We'll need to navigate carefully," he said, his voice low but steady. "The path is narrow, and one wrong step could send us tumbling down." The crew followed closely, stepping cautiously over the jagged rocks and uneven ground. Alara kept a steady pace, her gaze fixed on the peak ahead. Despite the challenging climb, there was a sense of anticipation in the air. They were getting closer. The energy signal was strong now, pulsing with a strange, otherworldly rhythm. "Stay focused," Alara reminded the crew. "We're not alone on this planet. We have to remain vigilant." The mountain pass narrowed, and the crew found themselves walking single file, each step bringing them closer to the source of the energy signal. The air was thin, and every breath felt more labored. Alara noticed the change in the atmosphere. The air was colder now, and the mist had given way to a strange unnatural fog that seemed to cling to the rocks. It was as though something was drawing them in. "Keep moving," Alara urged, her voice steady but tense. "We're close." Kale checked the scanner again. "The signal is coming from a cave at the peak," he confirmed. "It's almost like it's waiting for us." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but there was no turning back now. They were close, and they had no choice but to press forward. Every instinct told Alara that something was off, but she couldn't place what it was. The cave entrance appeared before them, hidden behind a veil of mist and jagged rocks. The eerie glow of the energy signal intensified as they approached, bathing the entrance in an unnatural light. "This is it," Kale said, his voice low. "The source of the signal." Alara nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She motioned for the crew to stay alert. "We go in cautiously, no surprises." The crew gathered at the cave entrance, the temperature dropping as they stepped inside. The walls of the cave were smooth, almost too smooth for a natural formation. The further they ventured inside, the stronger the energy signal became, and the air grew dense with static. The cave seemed alive with energy, humming softly as if it was waiting for them. Alara took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the darkness ahead. "Move in," she ordered. Inside the cave, the air was thick with static, and the low hum of the energy signal reverberated off the walls. Alara's footsteps echoed in the silence as she moved deeper into the cavern. The walls were unnaturally smooth, the rock appearing almost polished. As they ventured further, a faint light flickered in the distance, drawing them in. "Stay close," Alara whispered. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." Kale continued to monitor the readings on his scanner. "It's definitely coming from ahead," he confirmed. The further they went, the more intense the energy became. The cave seemed to stretch on endlessly, as though it was never meant to be explored. As they rounded a corner, the source of the light became clear. A large crystalline structure stood before them, glowing with a powerful, pulsing energy. Alara's breath caught in her throat. What in the world? The crystalline structure pulsed with a strange energy, its glow flickering as if it were alive. Captain Alara took a cautious step forward, her eyes locked on the object in front of her. "What is this thing?" she whispered to herself, though the question hung in the air for everyone to hear. Kale stepped closer, examining the readings on his scanner. "It's unlike anything I've ever seen," he said, his voice filled with awe. "The energy signature is off the charts. It's like it's emitting its own power source." The crew gathered around, unsure whether to approach or retreat. "Could this be the source of the signal we were tracking?" one of the crew members asked, his voice tinged with both fear and curiosity. Alara didn't respond immediately. She was too focused on the crystal, feeling a strange pull emanating from it. "We need to understand what this is," Alara said finally. "Get closer, but stay alert." As the crew moved closer to the crystal, the air around them seemed to grow heavier. The energy pulse was increasing, vibrating in their bones. Kale waved his scanner over the crystal, his expression growing more intense. "The readings are unstable," he said, backing away slightly. "If this thing is what I think it is, we need to be careful. It's highly volatile." Alara raised a hand, signaling for him to stop. She was determined to get to the bottom of this. "We didn't come this far to back down now," she said, her voice resolute. The crew exchanged uneasy glances but nodded in agreement. Alara moved forward, extending her hand cautiously toward the crystal. A sudden jolt of energy shot through the air, knocking her back. "Captain!" Kale shouted, rushing to her side. Alara's head throbbed, but she stood up quickly. "I'm fine," she said, shaking off the dizziness. "This thing is more dangerous than we thought." The crystal seemed to respond to their presence, its pulse fluctuating as if it were communicating with them. Alara steadied herself, feeling a strange warmth seep into her palm where she had touched the crystal. "What's happening?" she murmured. Kale quickly checked his datapad, his fingers moving frantically across the screen. It's sensing with the ship's systems," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. "The crystal is somehow interfacing with our tech." Alara frowned, stepping back. "That's not possible," she said. "The energy output from this thing could overload our systems." She turned to the rest of the crew. "We need to find out what it's trying to do. Secure the area and prepare to move out." The crew hesitated but obeyed. As they readied their equipment, the cave seemed to grow colder, the light from the crystal flickering with a more ominous rhythm. Something was changing. The crew moved deeper into the cave, the crystal still pulsing with strange energy behind them. Alara kept her eyes on the path ahead, her mind racing with questions. "We need to gather more data," she said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We can't leave until we understand what this crystal really is." Kale was still scanning his datapad. "The readings are becoming more erratic," he said, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It's almost like it's reacting to us being here." Alara nodded. "We'll have to be cautious. I don't know what this thing can do." As they moved further into the cavern, the ground beneath them shifted, and a low rumble echoed through the cave. The crystal's pulse intensified, and suddenly, a deep, resonating hum filled the air, vibrating through their bodies. Alara held up her hand. "Get back," she shouted. "Something's happening." The deep hum grew louder, and the cave seemed to tremble with each passing second. Alara's heart raced as she ordered the crew to retreat to a safer distance. "Get back to the entrance," she shouted. But before they could move, the ground beneath them cracked open with a violent force, and a massive energy pulse erupted from the crystal. The blast sent the crew flying back, their bodies hitting the cave walls with a sickening thud. Alara struggled to stand, her vision blurred from the impact. Kale was the first to recover, pulling Alara to her feet. "Captain, we need to get out of here now," he yelled over the cacophony of noise. The crystal was now glowing brighter than ever, its energy flooding the cave. Alara's mind raced, but she knew there was no time to waste. "Retreat! Get to the ship now!" The crew scrambled, barely able to stay on their feet as the cave continued to shake violently. The crystal was no longer just an object of mystery, it was a threat. The crew scrambled out of the cave, the ground beneath their feet still trembling from the crystal's violent eruption. Alara led the way, her breath ragged as she pushed forward through the dark and chaotic path. The energy pulse from the crystal was still shaking the cave behind them, but they had no time to look back. Kale checked the readings on his scanner, his face pale. "The signal is still there," he said, voice strained. "It's not stopping. It's almost like it's following us." Alara's heart raced. The crystal had just shown them its power, and they were only beginning to understand what it could do. "We need to reach the ship," she commanded, her voice unwavering despite the fear gnawing at her. "Now?" The crew nodded, pushing forward with renewed urgency. The storm outside still raged, but they had to get to the safety of the ship before whatever force the crystal had unleashed reached them. As the crew neared the ship, a sudden flash of light illuminated the sky, followed by a deafening roar. Alara's eyes shot toward the sky, her heart skipping a beat. We're not alone, she said under her breath. Kale's scanner beeped rapidly, indicating something approaching fast. Captain, we've got multiple targets, he said urgently. They're coming from above. The crew looked up, and a swarm of dark shapes appeared against the stormy sky, moving at incredible speed. Prepare for battle, Alara ordered, her voice steady but with an edge of urgency. Everyone, get to your stations. The shapes grew larger as they descended, revealing sleek, metallic craft with dark, angular designs. The crew had made the mistake of landing on a planet that wasn't as abandoned as they had hoped. Take cover, Alara shouted, pulling her weapon from its holster. The planet had its guardians, and they were about to make their presence known. The sound of engines grew louder as the enemy ships drew closer. Alara raised her weapon, her eyes scanning the sky for any sign of the attackers. Stay sharp, she commanded. We don't know what they want, but we're not going to give them an easy fight. The ships hovered overhead, their dark, ominous forms blocking out the few flashes of light from the storm. Suddenly, one of the ships broke formation, diving toward the ground with incredible speed. Brace for impact, Alara shouted as the ship came closer, its weapons charging. The crew scattered, diving for cover behind rocks and boulders, as the enemy ship opened fire. A blast of energy tore through the air, narrowly missing Alara. She barely ducked behind a large rock, her heart racing. Take them down, she barked. Get ready to fight. The battle raged as the crew fought back against the incoming ships. Alara peeked from behind her cover, aiming her weapon at the closest enemy ship. The air was filled with the sounds of blaster fire and explosions as the crew retaliated, doing their best to hold off the attack. Kale's voice came through her earpiece. I've got an idea, he said. If we can get to the ship's engines, I can override the systems and send out a counter-signal. It might disrupt their navigation. Alara glanced at the ship, its silhouette barely visible through the heavy rain. Make it quick, she said, her voice urgent. We can't hold them off for long. Kale made a dash for the ship, narrowly avoiding incoming fire. The crew continued to return fire, their weapons blasting through the downpour. Stay on him, Alara shouted. We need him to make it to the ship. Kale reached the ship, his heart pounding in his chest as he sprinted toward the engine bay. Behind him, the enemy ships continued their assault, but the crew was putting up a strong defense. Alara's voice crackled through his earpiece. Kale, hurry! He reached the ship's access panel and began working quickly, his fingers flying over the controls. The enemy ships were closing in, but he had only seconds. Almost there, Kale muttered, his eyes focused on the screen. A bright flash of light illuminated the area as one of the enemy ships fired a direct hit on the ship's hull. Kale's hands shook, but he managed to override the systems just in time. A pulse of energy shot out from the ship, sending the enemy craft reeling. The ships broke formation, retreating into the stormy skies. The battle was over, for now. Kale let out a breath of relief. It's done, he said. We're safe. The crew took refuge in the ship, the atmosphere tense as they regrouped after the battle. The storm outside continued to rage, but they had managed to repel the enemy forces, for now. Alara stood at the helm, her eyes scanning the sky. We need to get out of here, she said, her voice unwavering. We can't afford to stay on this planet any longer. That crystal's energy is a beacon, and those ships will be back. Kale was at the navigation console, typing rapidly. We've got enough fuel to make a jump to a nearby system, he confirmed. But I'm picking up another anomaly, a second energy source, much stronger, deep within the planet. Alara frowned. How deep? She asked. Under the surface, Kale replied. We're not alone down there. Alara stood still for a moment, her thoughts racing. Set the coordinates for the nearby system, she ordered. But we need to know more about that source before we leave. Prepare for another expedition. Alara's mind was heavy with the implications of Kale's findings. A second, stronger energy source deep within the planet's core. The realization was both exciting and terrifying. We've been here too long already, she said, her voice quiet but determined. The longer we stay, the more we risk drawing attention. but we need to understand what's happening here. Kale looked up from the console, his face drawn. I agree, but we don't have the luxury of time. If this energy source is what I think it is, it could be more powerful than anything we've ever encountered. Alara paced for a moment, deep in thought. Prepare the ship for a quick launch, she said finally. We're going down, but we need to be ready to leave at a moment's notice. We don't know what we're dealing with, but we have to find out. Kale nodded, already moving to prepare the ship's systems. The crew looked at each other with a mix of resolve and anxiety. They were about to dive deeper into the unknown. The ship descended once again into the stormy atmosphere, this time heading toward a newly discovered location on the planet's surface. The coordinates led them to a remote, desolate area, far from the earlier crystal site. We're getting close, Kale reported from the navigation station. The energy source is just ahead. The ship's landing gear extended, and Alara's grip tightened on the console as the ship slowly touched down. The crew was ready. Once we land, we move quickly, she ordered. We don't know what we'll find down there, but we need to gather as much intel as possible. As the landing ramp lowered, the crew stepped out onto the barren landscape. The wind howled around them, carrying a strange metallic scent. Alara's breath caught in her throat as she looked around, her eyes narrowing. The planet was hiding something far darker beneath its surface, and they were about to find out exactly what. The crew moved cautiously across the barren landscape, the wind whipping around them as they advanced toward the glowing energy source. The further they walked, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It was as though the very ground beneath their feet was alive, watching them. This is it, Kale said, his voice a mix of awe and unease, as he pointed to a distant structure partially obscured by the terrain. It was large, metallic, and covered in strange markings that seemed to pulse with the same energy as the crystal. What is that? One of the crew members whispered. Alara's gaze hardened. We're about to find out. The crew approached the structure carefully, every step laden with tension. The closer they got, the more they could feel the energy radiating from it, a low hum, vibrating through the air. Stay alert, Alara ordered. We don't know if this is an artifact or something more dangerous. As the crew stepped inside the structure, the atmosphere shifted. The air felt colder, the walls smooth and metallic, as if they had been carved by an ancient civilization. Alara's hand hovered near her weapon, ready for any sudden movement. The glowing markings on the walls flickered and changed colors, casting an eerie light on the interior. This place is alive, Kale murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. It's like a living machine. They moved deeper into the structure, following a narrow corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly before them. We need to find the source, Alara said, her voice firm. If we can learn how this technology works, we can use it. As they rounded a corner, they stumbled upon a large chamber. At the center of it was a massive core, glowing with a brilliant light. The energy from it felt almost tangible, humming in the air. This is it, Alara said, her voice filled with awe. This is the heart of the planet. The crew stood in awe as they gazed at the glowing core, its brilliance lighting up the massive chamber. The energy it emitted was overwhelming, vibrating through the air and resonating deep within their bones. Alara approached cautiously, her eyes narrowing as she studied the core. This is the source, she whispered, almost to herself. Kale, who had been examining his scanner, looked up. The energy readings are off the charts, he said, his voice filled with both wonder and trepidation. This is unlike anything we've ever encountered. It's sentient. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. What do you mean by sentient? Alara asked, her voice laced with concern. Kale looked at the core again, his face reflecting a mix of awe and fear. It's like it's aware of us, alive, in some way. Alara's gaze hardened. If it's alive, it might be watching us. We need to be cautious. She stepped closer to the core, her hand hovering in the air as if to reach for it, but she hesitated. Something was pulling her toward it, but she knew she needed more answers first. As the crew continued to study the core, Kale's scanner began to beep erratically, signaling a sudden shift in the energy readings. It's changing, he said, his voice filled with alarm. The core's energy is fluctuating. Something's happening. Alara stepped back, her eyes darting around the chamber. What do you mean? She demanded. Kale's fingers flew over the scanner, his brow furrowing. I think it's reacting to us. It's like it's trying to communicate. The hum of the core grew louder, and the entire chamber seemed to tremble. A pulse of energy shot from the core, lighting up the room in a flash of blinding white. The crew staggered back, shielding their eyes. Get back! Alara shouted, her voice commanding. The pulse dissipated, but the energy remained, thick in the air. The crew stood in silence, waiting for something else to happen. Whatever the core was, it was no longer passive. It had become active, and that meant they were in far more danger than they had anticipated. As the light from the core faded, the crew slowly regained their bearings. Alara's mind raced, her thoughts trying to catch up with the events unfolding. What was that? She asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline rushing through her veins. Kale was still examining his scanner, his face growing paler by the second. It wasn't just energy, he said quietly. That pulse was a signal. It's like the core is sending out a message. Alara's heart skipped a beat. A message? From what? Who could be sending it? Kale shook his head. I don't know, but the signal matches no known pattern. It's something completely new. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The implications were enormous. If this core was truly alive and capable of sending out signals, it could mean they weren't alone on the planet, or in the universe. Alara stood tall, a steely resolve settling over her. We need to find out who or what is behind this, she said. But we're not going in blind. We'll take every precaution. The decision was made quickly. Alara ordered the crew to set up perimeter defenses around the core, while Kale continued to study the energy patterns. They weren't taking any chances. As the crew worked, Alara's thoughts kept returning to the signal that the core had sent. If it was a message, who or what was it meant for? And why had it chosen to reveal itself now? As the crew completed their preparations, Kale approached Alara with a grave expression. Captain, I've been analyzing the data from the pulse, he said, his voice tight. It's not just energy. It's a form of communication. Alara looked at him, intrigued but cautious. You mean it's talking to us? Kale nodded. I believe so. And if we can decode it, we might learn everything. About the core, about the planet, and about whoever, or whatever, is controlling it. Alara took a deep breath. Then let's decode it. We need answers, and we need them now. As Kale worked to decode the signal, the tension in the room grew thicker. The crew was restless, moving in hushed whispers, unable to break the weight of the unknown. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Kale stood up, his eyes wide with astonishment. Captain, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I've decoded part of the message. Alara's heart raced. What does it say? Kale hesitated for a moment, then spoke, his voice steady but filled with awe. It's not from any civilization we know. It's a warning, a message from the past. The core was designed as a failsafe, meant to protect something far older than this planet itself. The room fell silent. A failsafe? Alara echoed. For what? Kale shook his head. I don't know yet, but I intend to find out. The crew exchanged nervous glances. They had just uncovered the first piece of an ancient puzzle, and it was far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined.